Assalamu alaikum. My name is Asha Bedar and I'm a clinical psychologist. I work with individuals, groups, I also do training and research, and I work primarily on issues of violence against women and children. And one of the areas that I work on is child sexual abuse, and I've been working on it for a number of years. But recently the issue has been highlighted because of the very unfortunate rape and murder of the little girl Zainab, which has been in the media. And it sparked a renewed interest in the issue, and understandably a lot of parents have been outraged, a lot of people have been outraged and angry and very worried about what is happening around them and how they can protect their children. So this is what I'm going to talk to you about today. But the objective really of what I'm going to talk to you about today is to give basic information, provide basic information to parents on child sexual abuse and on protecting their children. Child sexual abuse is defined as any sexual contact with a child. So when any child is used sexually by another child either, or an adult, or a child who's much older than the child who's being sexually abused, is what we would call child sexual abuse. So as you can understand, when we say used sexually or any kind of sexual contact, we're not just talking about rape. It can be fondling, it can literally range from touching, fondling, molesting, all the way up to rape or sodomy. And I also want to clarify here that when we talk about a child, we mean anyone under the age of 18. And that's important too, because child sexual abuse affects children of all ages. And there have been cases of infants being sexually abused all the way up to teenagers. And that's important to understand for parents, because sometimes we focus on children of a particular age group because we think that they are vulnerable, or we think little children aren't vulnerable, or we think adolescents aren't vulnerable because they can take care of themselves. But unfortunately, all children are vulnerable to child sexual abuse. So children of all ages, girls and boys. That's another common misconception, that we think that girls are more vulnerable, but that is not the case either. Children of all socioeconomic groups. So basically, I think an important point to remember from this is that all children are vulnerable, simply because they're children. Children can be abused pretty much anywhere, at home, at school, madrasas, on the street. So anywhere where there are children, they're vulnerable to sexual abuse. But naturally, when children are unattended, there's certain kinds of places where children are more vulnerable. So, for example, if a child is, unattended at any point completely by adults who can protect him or her, they're more vulnerable. Children, parents or caretakers or whoever, it can be the entire family. We know that all families are involved in taking care of the children. Are busy for some reason, and again, that's very natural for parents to be busy, either not there or busy, or just for some reason not paying attention. Children are more vulnerable. Now, this is not to say that that's neglect. It's very natural for parents to be busy, whether you're at work or whether you're busy at home or whether you're looking after other children or other members of the family. But I think one of the things that makes children even more vulnerable is the knowledge that abusers have that a child will be unattended for a long time and there will be minimal or no supervision. To be aware of where your child is. Now, a question that often comes up when we talk to parents is, does that mean that we're with our children all the time? Does that mean that we're constantly watching over them? And that's not the idea at all. The idea of this whole conversation is not to panic or to be alarmed or to become over anxious and think, we've got to hover around our children and constantly be watching them. In fact, that's not at all what you want to do, because children need space to grow and be independent and to be able to look after themselves in certain situations. But to be aware and to be alert, to know where your child is and to be involved in your child's life in different ways without being intrusive, without being controlling. Talk to your children as well. Now, this is again an important question because a lot of parents are hesitant, they're awkward, they're embarrassed to talk to their children, or they think that this is about sex education, which it isn't at all. But parents often don't have the words. So sometimes the willingness is there, but they don't quite know how to talk to the children. So I've often had parents ask me, well, what do we say? We want to be able to provide that information, but how do we do it in a way that's age appropriate, that's sensitive, where we don't want to give out information that isn't appropriate for their developmental levels, etc. So the thing is, there's actually a fairly simple way of doing that, which doesn't require any kind of extensive information, which can be given without being alarmed, without scaring the child, or without being scared yourself. And that's something that we call giving body protection information to children. And what it really involves is talking to your children about child sexual abuse or about body protection, just the way in which you teach them about other things. So it doesn't necessarily have to be this separate conversation where you're scaring your child about the dangers, but just as you would tell them about other things. Where you would tell them, well, this is how you stop yourself from getting cold or from getting hurt, or having a general conversation with the child from a very early age about how do we protect ourselves. Just like we tell children, don't play with matches, don't play on the stairs. With very young children, it's pretty similar. But the only thing is that there are certain points that you need to make sure that you've covered when you talk to your child. So for example, we would start a conversation and say to a child, what are your different body parts? And just like we give them a name for all of their body parts, we would also give them a name for the private parts of their body. And usually, when we work with children, what we do is show them a picture of a child, say, in a swimming costume, and say, well, these are the parts of the body that we cover, and that's because they're private. Not because they're dirty, not because they're shameful, not because of any other reason, then they're private and they're personal. And so we take care of them, and no one is allowed to touch them for no reason. And the reason we talk about no reason is because obviously sometimes you bathe your child, sometimes the child goes to the doctor. So people do see your child's body at some point or the other, but the child needs to be able to distinguish between what is okay when his or her body can be seen and when it isn't. And some pointers for that would be, for example, to have a discussion with your child and say, well, when is it okay? So for example, when you go to the doctors and you're hurt, or you're ill and your parents are with you and the doctor is checking your body, that's all right because your parents are there with you. Or for example, when you're being bathed and your parents are either bathing you or they're there when you're being bathed, or they can be there, so it's not being done secretly, that's okay too. So, or when you're being, for example, hugged by family members and you feel good about it and it's being done in front of everyone, that's all right too. But there's no reason for anyone to ever look at or touch your private parts for any other reason, or secretly. And I think that whole thing about the touching being a secret is really important, especially because that's how sexual abuse is done. Because children are fascinated by secrets. So what is it about this particular secret that's wrong? One, it's something that makes you feel uncomfortable. Children often have a sense of it being wrong, but they don't know what to do about it. So often what we'll say to children is, anything that makes you feel uncomfortable, it gives you a funny feeling, someone's telling you to not tell your parents or not to tell anyone about it, is a strong sign that it's not okay. Culturally, there's a lot of pressure on a child to, one, obey adults, and two, express their affection very physically. And even within family members, children are always being told, is auntie ko hug karo, jaake gale milo. And so children are often confused about, well, is that okay or is that not okay? So one of the things we do say is to teach a child to respect his or her body and what he or she likes. Sometimes that can create awkward situations within families, but it's important to involve the entire family. Involve the dadi, involve the nani, dada, uncles, so everyone knows, everyone's on the same page, and say, well, this is what I'm teaching my child right now, that he or she has control over his or her body. If you want to hug someone, that's okay, and if not, you can shake their hands. And it's being done in front of everybody. If they're feeling uncomfortable for whatever reason, children need to know that they have the right to say no. A lot of this information, of course, depends on the age of the child. So, when you're talking about secrets or when you're talking about, good touch, bad touch, the way in which you give this information will depend on how old your child is. And how much information you give will also depend on that. A simple role play. So what if somebody does try and touch you, or you're not sure and you're just uncomfortable, what do you do? Give your child the words in which to be able to refuse and say, no, this is my body and I don't like it when you're touching it. Or saying, or moving away from that situation, or calling someone. One of the most important things here is to sometimes, for younger children in particular, to provide the language to be able to say no. To provide the language to be able to say, I don't like it. Now, there are some prerequisites to that as well. Do you have communication channels open with your child? Does your child trust you? Does your child normally come to you for problems? Does your child talk to you about everyday things that happen at school or at a friend's place? Is your child okay with all of that as well? If not, then I think that's something that it's probably more important to work on first. So that kind of relationship building, so the child is able to trust you and come to you for that. Another thing that's important for that is also to kind of sort of role play or whatever with the child around what they can do in these situations, who they can go to and who they can talk to. So sometimes what we do with children is actually have like a list. So, who are the people you feel safe with? Who are the people you know will not hurt you? Is there a teacher? Is there an older sibling? Is it a parent? Is it a grandparent? Is it an aunt and uncle? And to have that list available for children to know that, these are all the options. It's unlikely for your child to be in a situation where he or she cannot access anyone. But if that situation does arise, then alternative options would also be good. So if it happens in school, who can you go to? What if your teacher is not available? Can you go to the security person in your school? Can you go to the baji who works there? Can you go into the office? Or if it happens at somebody's house, is there an older person you can go to? So I think just that provision of alternatives, just that idea that there are always people that you can go to. Yes, we know that this happens, but we also know that it's not a big, bad world out there where every person is dangerous. So it's important also for children to feel that sense of control and feel that sense of safety and to know that there are things they can do. Now, what I would say to that is that there are some signs that would point, where you could be pretty sure that there's something going on. And there are others where you might suspect it because those are signs of general anxiety and distress. So signs that would point to some kind of sexual exposure, not necessarily child sexual abuse, would include, for example, inappropriate sexual talk or inappropriate sexual play. So you learn a lot, and for those of you who have young children would know that children will act out a lot of what they're thinking with their toys, so with their dolls or with role play or with their cars or stuffed toys or whatever it is, or even through their art and drawings. They will often replay what's happening around them or anything that's distressing them. So if you're seeing some sexual content in there, which you think is inappropriate, which you think that a child of that age was unlikely to be displaying, then that's often a strong indication that there's something going on. It doesn't necessarily mean abuse, but it means that he or she is being exposed to something that he or she should not be exposed to. It could just be that, they've heard adults talk. It could be they've seen something on TV or older cousins or siblings talk about something, but it's worth exploring. And that's one of the main things that I would say to parents, that even if you're not sure, there are certain things that should, in a way, indicate to you that this is something I need to find out more about. And, so sexual play, sexual aggression, their play or through their games with other children, conversations that you might hear children do. Of course, there are also physical signs that might appear. So, there are some very obvious ones where, there are cuts or bruising or swelling in the genital area, and that's unexplained, which would be a very obvious one. Recurring urinary tract infections in very young children can sometimes also be a sign, and of course there can be sort of other sexual diseases as well. But those are more sort of obvious ones. But a lot of the times, sexual abuse doesn't get to that stage because perpetrators are very careful about not being discovered. And so there, the symptoms are more really around stress and anxiety. So, for example, any sudden change in behavior should indicate to a parent that there's something that's bothering the child. It may have nothing to do with sexual abuse, but just an indication, a child who's generally happy is suddenly being sullen, performance is falling, doesn't want to go to school anymore, or doesn't want to go to so-and-so's house anymore, or doesn't want to be with such and such person anymore, or in a certain place anymore. So sudden avoidance of things that he or she previously enjoyed. Again, that doesn't mean there's anything happening there. It just means that it's a question that you need to ask. It's a discussion that you need to have with your child. With older children, the signs and symptoms differ because a lot of them have to do with relationships, wanting to stay away from home. Again, some of it is just general, very adolescent, teenage behavior. But again, worth exploring, worth being concerned about, worth being more involved in as well. Those can also include risk-taking behavior. It can include unhealthy relationships. It can include sort of just of parents not being aware of where your child is because he or she is being extra secretive about something. There are suddenly gifts or unexplained money. Or your child is spending too much time with a particular adult and you don't know what they're doing. Perpetrators rely on the fact that number one, children will be too scared to speak out or too embarrassed. Number two, that parents will not want to talk about these things because there's a whole taboo around sexual issues. That's what gives them their power. Silence is a huge source of power for the abuser. Number three, that the child won't know what to say. You know, even if the child, a young child, wants to go and talk to his or her parents, what will he or she say? Because he won't have the words to explain what is happening. These are some of the things that they rely on. And number four, that there will be substantial time without a caretaking adult. And, you know, so whether it's because the parents are around but doing something else, or a grandparent, whoever the child is under the care of, will be there but no one's going to be checking up on them. That's an immense source of power for the abuser. So sure, we have maids, we have grandparents, you have other family members often babysitting, but as long as they know that the parent knows, the parent will be checking and the parent will be talking to the child about it, that takes away a lot of power from them. Having a relationship with your child where you can talk to them is one of the most important things that you can do in protecting them from child sexual abuse.